Let's talk about PCOS today. Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome is called historically a reproductive disorder. But what if I tell you now it's not quite true? And it's like calling a wind to an entire storm. Modern day evidence suggests that PCOS is a metabolic endocrine disorder which has a reproductive manifestation. And worldwide, 1 in 10 women are diagnosed with PCOS, but the diagnosis takes from 2 to 4 years. Why is so? To understand better, let's just check diagnostics criteria. You need to have any two of these 3 criteria. First, irregular or absent ovulation. Second, elevated androgens, that is men hormones like testosterone. And the third one, polycystic appearing ovaries on ultrasound. So you can have a PCOS without cyst on your ovaries. And another misconception about PCOS that comes historically again, that only overweight women have this disorder. But it's not true, and indeed this can delay diagnosis. So today I want to walk you through the molecular aspects of the PCOS and the treatment mechanism to understand better how PCOS affects your cells on the molecular level. Let me explain you insulin signaling pathway, how it works in normal cell in a normal condition. When the insulin hormone is produced by pancreas, it goes into the bloodstream. On the other hand, there are insulin receptors which are on the cell surface of many tissues like muscles, fat tissue, liver, and elsewhere. So, insulin receptor recognizes its molecule insulin, it gets activated, and afterwards the 2 branches of signaling cascade start working independently from each other. First branch called PI3K-AKT. After its activation, this signaling pathway sends a signal to GLUT4 transporter, which migrates on the cell surface, and it plays a role of a gate for the cell by entering the glucose molecule inside the cell. So you get the energy, you get the glucose, you get the energy for your cell. Okay, so the other pathway is called growth pathway, MAPK-ERK. It is responsible for cell proliferation, organ growth, and so on. To understand better what is happening on the molecular level inside your cell when there is a condition called PCOS, let me dive with you into the inner workings of your cell and zoom in particularly on the area of insulin receptor. So what's really happening downstream of insulin receptor is phosphorylation of some molecule which is called IRS1, insulin receptor substrate 1. So in a normal scenario, this should be phosphorylated one amino acid which is called tyrosine. In case of the PCOS, this IRS1 is phosphorylated on a wrong amino acid, and this wrong phosphorylation affects further the PI3-AKT signaling by paralyzing it. So this GLUT4 transporter, which otherwise had to go to the cell surface, act as a gate, is being paralyzed, so no glucose can enter into the cell, they stay in the bloodstream, which also affects further the insulin production. More insulin is produced, but gate lock is broken. It doesn't matter how much key you produce, how many the same key copies you have. On the other hand, interesting enough, when IRS1 is phosphorylated on a wrong amino acid, it doesn't affect the growth branch of the signaling pathway, which is called MAPK-ERK. And indeed, this ERK signaling, by staying active, it sends continuously signals to the thickened cells of your ovaries to produce more androgens, more testosterone. More androgens means more acne. I mean, in case of women, hair growth on the areas which otherwise in a normal condition wouldn't grow, hair density loss on the head, and so on. So this is all the manifestation of the high testosterone amount. Of course, elevated androgens disrupt also ovulation process. Let's talk about epigenetics and its role in PCOS development. Current evidence suggests that well over 1,000 genes may be epigenetically influenced across different tissues in PCOS. And one of them is insulin receptor gene INSR. And the structural gene LMNA, and they are all associated with reduced insulin sensitivity in PCOS. So to think about epigenetic regulation, imagine that gene is a book, and because of this methylation, let's say some writings of this book are being covered. So you cannot read it anymore properly, and you cannot retrieve the content correctly. The same is happening also on your genetic level. On the other hand, there are also genes, IRS1 or BMP4. They are hypomethylated, and this affects their activity on a positive way. So they are starting to be overactivated and then further on contribute to overexpression, overproduction of the testosterone. About the final layer, the role of your microbiome in the PCOS development. And research shows that women with PCOS has a significant alterations in their gut microbiome compositions. Particularly, there is a reduced amount of bacteria which are fermenting dietary fiber and producing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate. Those molecules can do something remarkable. They can cross the intestine barrier, enter into the circulation, and affect on the genes epigenetics regulation. Those genes are linked to the insulin sensitivity, inflammation. Let's see that the knowledge I gave you so far, the molecular aspects of the PCOS, epigenetics role, and the role of the microbiome, how we can translate into real life action. I want to talk about exercise. The AMPK mechanism explains why resistance training, specifically, not just any exercise, is particularly beneficial in PCOS. If you prioritize weight training 2 or 3 times per week, you already notice some benefits in the improvement of the symptoms. Second, I want to talk about metformin. So if your doctor has suggested metformin for PCOS, now you know why it works on the molecular level, because it bypasses the broken IRS1 route and then it activates AMPK through other route. So it's not just a diabetes drug, it is an AMPK activator that addresses a core molecular defect in PCOS. I want to talk about a diet, and indeed high fiber diets don't just reduce glycemic index, they restore short chain fatty acids production in the gut. This has a direct epigenetic consequence on insulin sensitivity and androgen production. So this mechanism matters because it tells you why quality of fiber matters and just not counting calories. On a final note, my dears, I just want to emphasize again, PCOS is not a willpower issue. PCOS is not a lifestyle issue. Indeed, it's a molecular signaling defect which creates a self-sustaining system of metabolic and hormonal disruption. So understanding this, of course, doesn't validate what women with PCOS experience, but it helps us to find interventions that can actually address underlying mechanisms rather than just treating symptoms. So follow for more to understand how science of being woman works.